Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com. A few days ago, someone left a comment which really struck me. The comment was basically something along the lines of, I just can't get into string quartets. I listen to them and they discombobulate my brain and make me nauseous, and all kinds of awful things happen. And I don't understand why. I just have a hard time listening to them and figuring out what they are. And I made a suggestion, and the suggestion was, one of the ways that you may want to approach the issue is to find a composer that you like, who wrote things that you like in other media, for example, orchestral music of various kinds, and who also wrote great string quartets. And then try listening to the quartets after you've heard one of the orchestral pieces and listen for stylistic similarities, because the composer will be speaking the same language, irrespective of whether or not you're listening to a symphony or a quartet or anything else that the composer wrote. I do think that works, actually. It's worked for me. It's worked for others. And so I decided to put together a little list of 5 composers who were superb writers of orchestral music, but also chamber music, and to marry some of their more famous orchestral works with some of their more famous string quartets, so that you would have an entree if you're trying to get into the string quartets. And I confess, chamber music generally is a little bit more difficult than orchestral music. It really ought not to be, because it was music for playing at home and having a nice time. But like so much in the classical music tradition, the prime example being songs, lieder, the classical version of this sort of stuff has been elevated to the point where it's intimidating, because just the way people talk about it is difficult. Now, string quartets by themselves require the medium requires a certain openness to what it is. That is, only three. The string quartet has 3, right? That's a good start, isn't it? Only 4 solo strings, and textures which can be rigorously contrapuntal. That is, there's a lot going on in them. And the irony of it is that if you listen to a symphony, you hear this gorgeous orchestra all going crazy, and it's magnificent. Generally speaking, the texture is simpler than in a string quartet, because in a string quartet, you hear everything. There's nothing covered by anything else. In an orchestra, you hear the tune, and you hear this big, juicy accompaniment. And yes, there can be counterpoint. There can be multiple lines in orchestral works going on simultaneously. But generally speaking, I'm speaking in gross generalities here, what you hear is what's on the top. And you hear with the instruments playing it, and everyone else is supporting, and it's all very happy and pretty straightforward. In a quartet, on the other hand, there is a certain busyness. And that busyness is emphasized by the fact that many composers who wrote quartets felt that they were obligated to indulge in that kind of busyness. Of course, they weren't, and that's a whole other issue in musical aesthetics. But the greatest quartets don't do that. The greatest quartets generally are like orchestral works. They have a tune on the top, and everybody else is accompanying, unless the movement itself is contrapuntal in essence, like a fugue or one of those forms that has several voices all going at once. But the bottom line is people talk about the string quartet in ways which are quite intimidating. We know, for example, that Beethoven's late string quartets are so sublime that they belong in another alternate universe entirely, and only the greatest musical geniuses can penetrate their transmogrified cryptological mystery, universal, essential. It's off-putting. It really is. I mean, because the music is the music. It's as passionate and beautiful and lovely as anything else the composer wrote. It's just of a different kind. You have to adjust your brain to not hearing massive changes in dynamic range, for example, from very soft to very loud. Orchestras are better at that. No question about that. String quartets, chamber music tends to be more intimate. It tends to speak to us in a more sensitive way. You have to be more attuned to subtle changes of tone color, and rhythm and accent and things like that. So in a sense, the chamber music element involves qualities that are more strictly musical than the orchestral medium, which has qualities which are sort of more like noise-based, like loud, soft, pounding rhythms, things like that, things that make your stereo go crazy. There's more glamour in orchestral music than there is in chamber music. And that's a problem. It's a problem in the way that you listen. You have to let the music be what it is and accept it on its own terms. That is absolutely goes without saying. But once you do that, you realize that chamber music has its own special things, which can't be equaled in the other media that you may enjoy. And so you have to appreciate them for what they are. That is your sort of basic thing. But another thing that makes string quartets kind of off-putting and difficult is the idea that they are written for the player primarily. You'll hear that a lot when you talk about chamber music, that it's a medium written for the performers in which the listeners are just eavesdroppers and all that. Oh, I think that's such bullshit. I can't even begin to start where that's such bullshit. I mean, music that's written to be played is written to be heard. And whoever hears it is on, they're the same level as anybody else. The idea that this music was written to be private and real people weren't supposed to hear it is like demented. It's really, really one of those snobisms, frankly, that, infects the whole classical music experience. I can tell you as a performer, not as a string player, but it is impossible for somebody to have a sense of the overall sound of the work in a room if they're busy playing one part the whole time. Can't be done. Now, there may be a very special pleasure in playing that one part and in interacting with your colleagues in playing an entire quartet. I don't deny that string quartet performers get a very special thrill out of getting together and playing string quartets. It's a different thrill that we as audience members get watching them do it and listening to the whole thing. From the outside, as it were. They're different experiences, but they're equivalent experiences. Again, it's like the comparison between the string quartet and the orchestra. They're different experiences. One isn't better than the other. One isn't more sublime than the other. One isn't more transcendental than the other. It's all there for us to take in, experience, and enjoy for the great music that it is. And great music is great music. It doesn't matter whether it's written for a kazoo choir or for an orchestra. If it's great, and that's the bottom line. So with that said, this lengthy introduction, I'm going to go through 5 groups of works and explain to you how you might find it useful to listen to first an orchestral piece and then a chamber music work, because they're related. They're related in various ways. In the beginning, we're going to start with Dvořák. Now, Dvořák was an amazing chamber music composer. He wrote 14 string quartets. Not all of them are equivalently fabulous. Some of the earlier ones are student works, basically. But after about, 5 or 6 or so, 6 or 7, he was going like gangbusters. His most famous string quartet is number 12 in F major. It's called the American Quartet. And it's called the American Quartet because he wrote it while he was on a train to Spillville, Iowa, during his years running the National Conservatory in New York in the early 1890s. He also wrote, as an American work, the New World Symphony, which might as well be called the American because that's what the New World was. And the symphony is his most popular symphony. So his most popular symphony and his most popular string quartet are both American works. And they're both written in what was a stylistic phase he went through when he first encountered music here in the United States, which was the music of African Americans and Native Americans and all of those. And he believed that American music should be based on that kind of music, on those musical elements, that just like he did with Czech music, with Czech folk music. And he wanted to show people how that could be done. And so while his music is still Dvorak and it's still Czech in essence, it also adopted some of these very interesting melodic styles, such as 5-note melodies, pentatonic melodies, Chinese music is pentatonic. Da 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 da. Well, the opening of the American Quartet is da 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 da. Da 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 dum ba da da dum ba da 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 dum. Doesn't that sound terrible? It's such a wide-ranging melody. It's played on a viola, frankly, which is very interesting. But that's pentatonic, and you hear them in the New World Symphony as well. You really do. I mean, it's Dvorak was also fascinated by birdsong, which you hear in the scherzo of the American Quartet, and you hear throughout the New World Symphony. You hear little birdie things, twittering along, and and the finales are very interesting because Dvorak was also fascinated by trains, and he wrote many tunes that evoke railroads. And it's just marvelous to hear his railroads. One of his very greatest train tunes is the end of the American Quartet, the last movement. It's just cha-cha-cha-cha, 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 cha-cha-cha-cha. It's like that. And you hear it in the New World Symphony. You hear these train things happening. And so the pieces have a lot in common in terms of their musical language. And if you like one, there should be nothing stopping you from adoring the String Quartet number 12. It's also a piece, by the way, that shows just the amazing range of color that you can get from these four instruments. The very opening begins with little trill things on the various instruments. The cello comes in, womp womp, and then the viola has the main tune. You get tremolos, you get pizzicatos plonking along, you get really fabulously colorful music as well within the medium of the string quartet. So that's where I would start. If you really want to get into string quartets, I know people will say, well, the great string quartet, classical writers, Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, and we're going to get to those in a minute. But no, that's not the best place to start, I don't think. I think you really need to have something with a very personal and distinctive language that is immediately gripping and recognizable in the sense that you'll know that this is Dvorak, you'll know that this is American style, and you'll hear the relationship in the type of melodies that the two pieces use. So that's where I would begin with string quartets. Listen to the New World Symphony, then listen to the American Quartet, which, by the way, is only about 25 minutes long. It's not a very long work, a little bit less maybe. Next, now we're going to go a little tougher. Yeah, and this is also where I sort of buck tradition, because again, you can start with the classical quartets. I list them below in this list that you'll see here, and you can start there if that's what you would prefer. But I wouldn't. I would start with something modern and contemporary, because that's what the kind of music we're used to hearing. We hear it in films, we hear it on television, and people wrote string quartets in that style, just like they write big shebangy orchestral extravaganzas for movies. So Shostakovich is our next composer, another great quartet composer. He wrote 15 quartets and 15 symphonies. And there's some interesting relationships between them. We're starting now with the Symphony number 8 in C minor. Now I'm listing keys. In the Dvorak, the keys don't matter. The New World Symphony's in E minor and the American Quartet's in F major. But it's very, very interesting with a lot of composers, when they write quartets and other orchestral works in similar keys, sometimes they have similar things happening because composers associate certain types of music with those musical keys. And here we're talking about C minor, which is a famously tragic key. I mean, Beethoven's Fifth is in C minor originally. The opening movement, it ends in C major. But Shostakovich's Eighth is one of his biggest and most tragic symphonies. It is a powerhouse of a symphony. It really is. It's in 5 movements, the central one of which is a toccata, a violent, rapid piece in constant movement, vicious and nasty, and the symphony ends quietly in a sort of exhausted calm. And that's the way it goes. Now, it just so happens that Shostakovich's 8th string quartet, there it is also in 5 movements. And it also features a really nasty toccata although it's not the same movement. In the symphony, it's the third movement. In the quartet, it's the second movement. And the movements are all connected in the string quartet. The last three movements are all connected in the symphony. It also features, after the toccata in the symphony, there is this parallelized, the movement is a passacaglia, actually, which is a set of variations over a repeating bass line. But it's music of just numbness, frozen silence and numbness. It's really, really still and desolate. And there's one of those in the eighth quartet as well. It's actually the third movement, if I'm not mistaken. No, it's the fourth movement, pardon me, which sounds just like, sustained notes and then bombs dropping. It's been described as. And the quartet also ends quietly, as does the symphony. And the interesting thing here is that you can transition from the symphony to the string quartet, because the symphony was arranged with Shostakovich's consent as a chamber symphony, that is a small scale symphony for string orchestra. And so it exists in two versions, Opus 110A, which is for string orchestra, and Opus 110, which is the original quartet. So you can listen to the Eighth Symphony if you want to start there, if you like Shostakovich and his symphonies, or you can start with the Chamber Symphony for string orchestra and then transition to the string quartet itself. However you want to do it, in any mixture or combination you please, it shows you exactly who the composer is, what he's doing, and how these works relate to one another. And you'll find that the string quartet is every bit as powerful and gripping as the symphony. Some people would say it's even more so. It's even more, it's a sadder work, even more tragic and more intense in some respects than the symphony, and all the more so because it's very compressed. It's also not a very long work. The symphony plays for nearly an hour, the quartet for about 20 some odd minutes. And so that's another wonderful way to start to learn how to enjoy the string quartet medium, by enjoying the composer's musical persona, his style. So after Shostakovich, we have to go to the guy who was the father of the string quartet. He wasn't the first guy to write them, but he was the first guy to show what you could do with them. And that's Haydn. Haydn wrote 68 and a half string quartets, I think, something like that. There's quite a pile of them. And I've chosen two works, both in the key of F minor, from Haydn's Sturm und Drang period. Sturm und Drang means storm and stress, and his Sturm und Drang symphonies are incredibly famous. The most famous is the Farewell Symphony. You may have heard of that one. It's the one where people, in the last movement, they all leave one at a time because the musicians wanted to go home. And Prince Esterhazy was hanging out in Esterhazy. And the musicians lived in those days in the military barracks, and they had to leave their wives and children back in Vienna at the main palace. And they were getting annoyed. So Haydn wrote a symphony, supposedly, that illustrated the intention of the musicians to go home. And the prince looked at it and heard it and said, okay, you guys win, we'll leave, let's go. And they packed up and went home. Well, that's one of the Sturm und Drang symphonies. But the other famous one is number 49, subtitled La Passione. The Passion of Christ, of course, is the one they're talking about, though there's no relationship that anyone's been able to determine between that and the actual music. But it's a deep, dark, intense piece of minor key mayhem music. But Haydn also wrote a series of string quartets, his Opus 20 string quartets, 6 of them, because they came in groups of 6 in those days, often, is not 3 or 6 usually. And this is widely regarded as the group of quartets, the Opus 20 quartets, that established the stylistics and aesthetics of the classical string quartet, the ones that we know and love, the ones that have intimidated everybody ever since. It was these. And there are 2 quartets in this series of 6, which are in minor keys. One of them is in the same minor key as La Passione. And so you've got 2 works that both emphasize darker emotions, turbulent musical textures, incredibly radiant lyricism in places too, which is beautiful, transcendentally beautiful lyrical music in both works. They're extraordinary pieces and remarkable pieces. In the string quartet, you will hear an emphasis on counterpoint, which you don't hear as much in the symphony, but it doesn't make any difference. I mean, you'll be just as far ahead. Just try listening to these two, to the symphony and then the string quartet, both in the same key, and you will hear Haydn operating with the same language, just different forms. There's chocolate and vanilla, that's what they are. But they're equally powerful and absolutely magnificent. So next we do Mozart. Now, Mozart was a great quartet writer as well, and of course an amazing writer of orchestral music, particularly concertos. And so today, for this example, we are comparing two works, both in the key of B-flat major, his 15th piano concerto and his 17th string quartet, which is subtitled The Hunt, because the first movement of the Hunt Quartet sounds like a hunt. Now, you've heard hunting music on horns. It's usually hunting horns. And it was a major topic of instrumental music in the classical period, because hunting was how a lot of the nobility spent a lot of their time. And there are very, very famous hunting works. There's a Hunt Symphony by Haydn, and there's the Hunt Chorus in Haydn's The Seasons. And Mozart wrote this quartet. He didn't give it the title The Hunt. He didn't do that. He didn't need to. Because we do hear ba bum ba bum ba 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 bum ba da 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 da. It's hunting music. It really is. And the piano concerto ends with the most wonderful hunting tune. Like that. And the quartet begins with a tune that's similar to that. I'm not going to punish you by whistling it or humming it, but you get it right away. And so the finale of the concerto and the first movement of the quartet are obviously related in terms of the musical images they evoke, but the rest of the works are sui generis. They're original, unique pieces that you can take, on their own terms. But that's one way to get into the string quartet, because these pieces, it's worth pointing out, while they are, of course, steeped in the individual language of their composers, that language is part of a common practice, part of a culture in which certain ideas and images and topics, as they're called, topoi in Greek, it's if you want to be technical about it, those things recur. They recur in music by various composers. They recur over the centuries. You can hear the same hunting music in Respighi's Festa Romana. There's a hunt. You hear this horn? Well, that Respighi horn part also appears in Haydn's The Seasons with the same horn calls. These things are just in the blood and fiber of Western musical culture. And so another way to begin to enjoy string quartets is to hear works or listen to works that evoke those topics that you may already be familiar with from listening to other things. So there we have that one. And last but not least, of course, we have to talk about Beethoven. But we're not going to do the late quartets, the ones that are so sublime that, they'll put you in a coma of sublimity. They're wonderful works, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to denigrate them. What I'm just trying to point out is that you don't have to, do this. You don't have to be worshipful. Get to it when you get to it and take it on your own terms because you're in charge. That's the idea. So for Beethoven, we have his Pastoral Symphony No. 6 in F major, which is just delicious and which is about things. It's about, going to the country and a scene by the brook and there's a thunderstorm and all that stuff. And his Razumovsky String Quartet No. 1, which is his String Quartet No. 7, Opus 59 No. 1. Razumovsky was the count. It was a Russian count who commissioned these three quartets from Beethoven with the proviso that he use a Russian theme in each one. And the Russian theme actually is the same theme as the theme from the coronation scene in Mussorgsky's opera Boris Godunov. Da 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 da. It's really rather cool, but that's a whole other issue. It's not about a coronation. It's just a Russian theme. Anyway, so there's a Russian theme in the seventh string quartet, but the point about it more topically, I think, is that it's in F major, just as the symphony is. And F major is a very popular key to express pastoral emotions. for some reason, it works really, really well for scenes of countryside and that kind of lovely, fresh. Dvorak wrote some gorgeous stuff in F major that was very, very pastoral. And even Brahms did too. Dvorak's Fifth and Brahms' Third, they're both in F major. And Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony is in F major. And this quartet has a lot of that sort of sunny, open air freshness about it. The very opening tune on the cello, which is ya da 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 da, ya da 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 cha 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 ba da. It's just this wonderful, carefree. It's accompanied by the rest of the strings just going chuk 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 chuk. It's delicious. It may not be one of Dvorak's trains, but it could be a horse trotting out in the countryside. I mean, these images come to you or not. You could regard it as a complete exercise in abstract musical emotional expression, or it can create concrete images. And so one of the reasons I group these works together is because here you have a symphony which is full of concrete imagery and description, and then you have a string quartet which has none that we know of, but which is recognizably the same language. And so you may well find it helpful when listening to this string quartet for the first time to think about its relationship to the symphony, to the key of F major, to pastoral imagery, or you may not. It's entirely up to you, entirely how it strikes you. But there you have it, my friends. 5 little grouplets of orchestral works and string quartets by 5 masterful composers of orchestral works and string quartets. And hopefully this will help you wend your way to enjoying the string quartet repertoire, which is amazingly great and incredibly rewarding, and it's a whole world just waiting to be explored at your leisure. And there's one other, just in closing, I want to make one quick point. All of this music you can hear very easily on YouTube. I mean, people say, why don't I use musical examples more frequently? Well, one reason is because of copyright issues, copyright claims, number one. The other reason is because we're talking about works in large forms, and to play a 20-second sniglet may be nice. I mean, it's, you get a sense of it a tiny bit, but it really takes some time. And I would much rather you seek out the works and spend some time with them, because that will be much more rewarding than just hearing a little sniplet. Although I do them when I can. I mean, I will. I appreciate the value of that too. And last, but certainly not least, there are recommendations for listening for all of these pieces over at classicstoday.com. Hundreds and hundreds of recommendations. So you can look things up there and decide how to plan your own listening. I mean, it takes a little bit of research and work, but I'm not averse to that. I mean, I want to make listening to the music as easy and approachable as I can. But on the other hand, there is some homework you just have to do, because if you love the music and care about it, you should be willing to learn at least, the vocabulary, the syntax, the culture, the community, the way that we interact in dealing with these works. And so I'm trying to strike a balance. And I hope I've done that in this little chat. Let me know if it works for you and if you find it useful. I really hope that it does. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.